Remember how we forgot? Remember how no one ever really died in the wars we fought? 'Cause each gunshot came from our fingertips, and we never really kept them loaded just in case.
If you're doing news reporting, you'd be framing it in the way you'd write a news story, which is like, something has happened, this is what has happened, this is potentially the consequence of this, here are people talking about what's happened, blah, blah, blah. So that's something, the clear issue. If you're doing a feature story, it's completely different because you can choose to frame it depending on what the issue is. You can frame it almost any way you want. But a news report would have to be, obviously, newsy. If that makes sense. If you're doing radio, again, you'd probably frame it really differently than if you're doing like broadcast or like a documentary. So it just kind of depends like the type of journalism that you're doing to cover an issue.
I learn a lot by just being in the country. I do the slow journalism, which is usually which sort of results in endless stories. So I choose a subject. I choose the story that I know or believe that will fascinate me long enough to make the investment in time and in money worth my while. So I carefully choose my subjects, and then I go to a place, and I just find a place to sit and to stay, and then I start to talk to people and to observe. And to let those people tell me what the story is and where the story is, and sometimes it can take weeks for me to be before the court drops.
But the stories choose me, and I try to go and tell the stories that aren't really in the mainstream media, like that aren't getting very much attention, And I mean, here in Vancouver, I find it very hard to find stories that I want to devote a lot of time to.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to humanitarian crisis stories, so mostly I spend a long time. I'm talking a really long time. Like I spent 2 years in Sri Lanka making a documentary, a half-an-hour documentary. It's not very productive use of my time. So what is objectivity? I mean, in a nutshell, objectivity is a myth, in my view. But I see it as being, as my duty as a journalist is to be ethical in my reporting. And what do I think? Ethics means to tell the truth and not to cause harm. And I was talking to one other student in your class today, and I told him a little bit about Martin Bell, who was a former BBC journalist, and he came up with this theory called a journalism of attack. So traditional journalism, objectivity says, be neutral, be objective. Well, how come Martin Bell is saying, I'm going to actually be attached. I'm actually going to take sides here. So if I'm in a war zone, let's just say, and I'm seeing that there are people suffering, and my goal is to show how they're suffering and why they're suffering. And if they're suffering because someone is bombing them or torturing them or threatening them, well, I'm going to tell that story. And it doesn't mean I have to give 50% of my story to the perpetrator and 50% to the victim or survivor. But I'm definitely going to try to get, quote or talk to the perpetrators. Why are you doing this? Yeah, but my duty is to, more along the lines of what Martin Bell says, to be attached. And I'm inclined to tell the story of the people who are suffering, whose voices aren't heard.
Objectivity doesn't doesn't exist. So the next step would be that every journalist has its own perception of what objectivity should be, and then I can understand that those three different perceptions, definitions, could do happen. Yeah, I can see them coming into existence. But objectivity in itself, it doesn't exist because you're a human being. Every single choice that you make of the subject that you want to look at, every single word that you choose to write your story, every single person that you choose to interview, that it's all based on subjectivity.
So in the past, journalism has historically been exactly what you mentioned, like, you know, you can't take a strong opinion or stance on anything, because, you know, you'll sway the readers and you could be wrong. And so the readers should have the most unbiased reportage that they can get so they can make their own decision. But then sort of along the way, it kind of was realized that, you know, that's really problematic, because how do you measure that? How do you measure something like objectivity? Are you being objective? And so the kind of common theme now in journalism, at least the way that we're taught it now in Canada, and I think this goes for the States as well, is that you can't be objective. You cannot be 100% objective ever, because everyone has personal biases and everyone has, you know, an opinion on something, for the most case, whether you are aware of it or not. Because it's one thing for me to say, you know, okay, I'm pro-environment. So when I report, I'm going to be really careful not to be too pro-environment in my reporting. But what about those biases that I have that I'm unaware of? So one thing that people are doing now is it's about being transparent. It's not about being objective. Okay. Being transparent means, yeah, you might have some biases, but you make them very well known, either as a little blurb in the top of your article, or you have a profile online that is discussing you just want to be transparent about everything that you do. So you're still trying to write, you know, in a as neutral way as possible for news stories, anyhow. But and I think editors really help with that, because if you ever get too impassioned, they'll be like, okay, you got to check yourself, because this is, you know, a news hit it should be pretty opinionless. But it's important to try to check your biases and leave them at the door when you're reporting. But to be honest, that would make for kind of bland journalism if nobody ever took an opinion on anything, you know? It's just kind of like it's like a balancing act. Okay. And unfortunately, there's no laws in journalism. And well, there are for, like, you know.
You've seen it all before, and then it is easier to go beyond the victimhood, and then it's easier to go below that surface and find other stories. I don't often see people as victims. I see people as victims of those circumstances, or victims of in a certain period in their lives, or victims of themselves even. Africa has a big problem with the public image, the PR image that it has with us. It is very, very difficult to explain to people here that Africans have normal lives too. A refugee camp or an AIDS clinic is the only thing that you see in your 3 days in Africa. Then it is very easy to maintain that image in your head. But if you live in Africa, like I did for years, then you stop seeing AIDS patients because you don't go to those clinics.
So he was writing an article about that, and he was talking about the people that had been stabbed, and there's 2 men and a woman. So he didn't give the race of the men, but he wrote 2 men and an Aboriginal woman. And the fact that he put the word Aboriginal in front, when I was doing my edit, I asked him, I was like, is there any reason why her being Aboriginal is that important to the story? Like, why aren't you identifying the race of the other men? And without even knowing it, you're contributing to being like, well, it's a downtown east side stabbing, like, this woman was Aboriginal. It's kind of like, you know, there's implication that she was maybe up to no good to be in the area. So it's like, why perpetuate something?
Will a newspaper or a news organization want to devote the time to it? Very, very unlikely now. So I agree with you that we are getting a very thin story. A thin story. And what is the consequence? Maybe more stereotyping, maybe more kids with flies in their eyes. Yeah, I think there is a lot of that. And would you read a story about the politics of Yemen or Libya?
Remember how we used to bend reality, like we were circus strongmen, like our imaginations were in shape then, like we were all ninjas trained in the deadly art of did not. Like, I totally got you. Did not. Remember how we forgot? Remember how our parents told us never to look directly into the sun, and how we were their son, so we never looked directly into the mirror in fear that we would go blind? Remember how we used to find any old reason just to call someone we were crushing on, like we could just